On the evening of the 12th of September 2014, in the refined quiet of Vienna's Innere Stadt, a woman named Anja Novak stood before a triptych by a minor Flemish master, her posture one of scholarly contemplation. To the casual observer at the exclusive gallery opening, she was exactly what her carefully constructed identity purported her to be. A freelance art restorer and historian, recently relocated from Ljubljana, with a specialization in late Gothic iconography. Her presence was justified by the professional circles in which she moved. Her conversation was limited to the technical merits of the artist's use of lapis lazuli, and her demeanor was one of detached academic interest. Yet, her focus was not on the centuries-old artwork. Instead, her attention was directed toward a conversation occurring 10 meters to her left, near a marble pedestal displaying a modernist sculpture. She was not listening to the words, which were deliberately banal pleasantries about the quality of the canapés, but was instead observing the micro-expressions and postural shifts between two men, a portly Austrian industrialist and his impeccably dressed Serbian financial advisor, Dragan Volkov. Anja's task was not to understand the art, but to understand the intricate, invisible architecture of trust and influence that Volkov commanded. Her mind was a passive sensor, absorbing data points. The way the industrialist deferred to Volkov, with a subtle inclination of his head, the fleeting moment Volkov's otherwise warm smile tightened at the mention of a bank in Zurich, the specific manner in which a handshake lingered a fraction of a second too long, signifying an agreement that had nothing to do with art. Anja Novak did not exist. She was a legend, a complex artifice of documents, memories, and mannerisms created by a European intelligence service. The woman inhabiting this identity, whose real name was Clara, was the central component of an operation designed to solve a problem that years of satellite surveillance and electronic eavesdropping had failed to penetrate. She was not a spy in the traditional sense. She carried no weapon, possessed no training in physical combat. Her purpose was far more delicate and infinitely more complex: to become a ghost in a machine of money and ideology, and to dismantle it from within, one silent, carefully calibrated action at a time. The problem, designated by the agency as the Balkan Route, was a financial network of bewildering complexity and brutal efficiency. It served as the primary funding conduit for a transnational extremist organization, a group that blended ethno-nationalist ideology with organized crime to finance its operations. For nearly a decade, this network had funneled hundreds of millions of euros from illicit activities ranging from narcotics trafficking to extortion into operational funds used for arms, procurement, recruitment, and terrorist attacks across Western Europe. The strategic challenge was its resilience. Conventional financial intelligence, or FININT, which relied on tracking transactions through the global banking system, proved almost entirely ineffective. The network's architects had designed a hybrid system that exploited the seams between ancient trust-based remittance systems and cutting-edge financial technology. Large sums were first broken down and moved through a modern interpretation of the Hawala system, an informal value transfer network where money never physically crossed borders. Instead, debts were settled between brokers in different countries based on honor and intricate ledgers. Once the funds were dispersed and anonymized through this method, they were reconsolidated and injected into the legitimate economy through a labyrinth of shell corporations, registered in jurisdictions with deliberately opaque beneficial ownership laws, from Cyprus to the British Virgin Islands. The final layer of sophistication involved the then nascent world of cryptocurrencies, using tumblers and mixers to further obscure the final destination of the capital. This multi-layered approach meant that by the time any funds were used for a tangible purpose, their origin was practically untraceable, a digital ghost in the international financial system. Previous attempts to disrupt the Balkan Route had ended in costly failure. A 2011 operation that sought to use signals intelligence to intercept communications between Hawala brokers resulted in the capture of terabytes of encrypted data that remained unbreakable. The network did not rely on standard commercial encryption, but on a custom-designed, one-time pad system implemented through seemingly innocuous image files shared on public forums, a digital dead drop that left no discernible pattern. A subsequent attempt in 2013 to place a human asset within the lower echelons of the organization's criminal wing in Belgrade failed catastrophically. The asset, a seasoned undercover officer, was exposed within 3 months, a victim of the network's intense paranoia and its deep roots in tight-knit communities where any outsider was immediately suspect. The failure underscored a critical reality. The Balkan route was not just a financial mechanism. It was a cultural and ideological construct built on generations of familial and clan loyalties, forged in the crucible of the Yugoslav wars. Trust was the network's primary defense, and it could not be breached by conventional means. The organization was bleeding the continent, funding attacks that grew in sophistication and lethality, and the intelligence services were effectively blind, watching the consequences unfold without any ability to preemptively sever the financial lifeline that made them possible. A new approach was needed, one that was audacious, unconventional, and acknowledged that the network's greatest strength, its reliance on personal trust, was also its most exploitable vulnerability. The architect of this financial fortress, and the primary target of the new operation, was Dragan Volkov. On the surface, Volkov was a paragon of Vienna's cosmopolitan elite. A Serbian national in his late 40s, he had built a highly respected boutique financial advisory firm, Volkov Capital, which catered to a select clientele of old Austrian money and new Eastern European oligarchs. He was a patron of the arts, a fixture at the Vienna State Opera, and a man whose public persona was one of quiet brilliance and unimpeachable integrity. His firm specialized in wealth preservation and discreet asset management, navigating the complexities of international tax law with a skill that bordered on artistry. This legitimate, highly profitable business was, however, a masterful piece of camouflage. It provided Volkov with the perfect cover, the access, and the technical infrastructure to manage the Balkan route. He was not merely a facilitator, he was its chief strategist, the intellectual force who had designed its hybrid structure. His genius lay in his ability to weave illicit funds into the fabric of legitimate global commerce, making the clean and dirty money indistinguishable. He used his clients' legitimate portfolios as a sea in which to hide the movements of terrorist funds, executing complex derivatives trades and real estate transactions that served both to grow his clients' wealth and to launder the organization's cash. The agency's psychological profile of Volkov revealed a man of profound contradictions. He was meticulous, patient, and possessed a formidable intellect, capable of holding vast, interlocking financial structures in his mind. Yet, his motivations were not rooted in greed. He lived comfortably but not ostentatiously, and intelligence analysis indicated he took only a modest percentage for his services, reinvesting the majority back into the network. His true driver was a deeply ingrained ideological conviction, a fervent ethno-nationalism born from personal trauma during the Balkan conflicts of the 1990s. He saw his work not as criminal, but as a patriotic duty, a way of waging a clandestine war against a West he believed had wronged his people. This ideological core made him exceptionally dangerous. He was not susceptible to bribery or blackmail. His operational security was flawless, bordering on paranoid. He conducted all sensitive business in person, never on the phone or via email. He employed technical and physical counter-surveillance sweeps of his office and home weekly. His inner circle was minuscule, composed of a handful of individuals bound to him by blood or shared wartime experiences. He trusted no one he had not known for decades. He was, for all intents and purposes, an impenetrable target, a ghost who managed a river of invisible money from a fortress of legitimacy and paranoia. Any attempt to approach him directly would be detected and neutralized. The only way to get to Volkov was to create a person he would choose to bring inside his fortress himself. The proposed solution, developed over 18 months by a small, isolated cell within the agency, was codenamed Operation Lachesis, after the Greek fate who measured the thread of life. The plan was as audacious as it was unorthodox. It rejected a direct assault on the network's financial or criminal elements and instead focused entirely on its architect, Dragan Volkov. The core concept was to exploit a single, subtle vulnerability identified in his psychological profile, his intellectual vanity, and his genuine passion for art. Volkov used the art world as a tool for money laundering, but his interest was not purely utilitarian. He was a true connoisseur, with a particular fascination for the intersection of religious iconography and political power in Central European history. The plan was to insert a human asset, an operative who could engage him on this esoteric level, building a relationship based not on finance or politics, but on a shared intellectual pursuit. This asset would not be a honey trap or a traditional intelligence officer playing a role. She would have to be a genuine expert in the field, a persona so authentic and deeply layered that it would withstand the intense scrutiny of a man like Volkov. Her objective would not be to gather intelligence in the short term, but to patiently and meticulously weave herself into his life until she became an indispensable part of it, a trusted confidant in a world where he trusted no one. The ultimate goal was to maneuver her into a position where she could gain access to the one thing he kept completely offline and under his personal control, the central ledger of the Balkan route. The obstacles to Operation Lachesis were monumental. The technical challenges were significant. The asset would need a covert communications system that was undetectable by the sophisticated sweeps Volkov employed. The linguistic and cultural barriers were equally formidable. The operative would need to be a native-level German speaker, fluent not just in the language but in the specific dialect and cultural nuances of Vienna's elite social circles. She would have to understand the subtle codes of etiquette, the unspoken hierarchies, and the intricate web of relationships that defined this insular world. The greatest risk, however, was the psychological toll on the operative herself. She would be required to live a lie, 24 hours a day, for what could be years, completely isolated from her previous life. She would have to form a genuine-seeming connection with a man responsible for immense suffering, suppressing any personal feelings of revulsion to maintain her cover. The margin for error was zero. A single slip, a misplaced word, an anachronistic cultural reference, a moment of emotional honesty would not only compromise the mission but would almost certainly result in her death. The consequences of failure were absolute, not just for the operative but for the agency, which was staking years of resources and a human life on a plan that bordered on the statistically impossible. The operation was a gamble on the power of a perfectly constructed lie to defeat a fortress of paranoid conviction. The woman chosen to become Anja Novak was named Klara. She was not a field agent but a senior analyst in the agency's forensic accounting division. Her selection was the result of a multi-stage profiling process that identified her as a unique convergence of the requisite skills and, crucially, the correct psychological motivation. Klara was a brilliant analyst, capable of seeing patterns in complex data that others missed. She held a doctorate in economics and was a certified fraud examiner. But she also held a master's degree in art history, a genuine passion she had pursued before her life took a different course. She was fluent in German, Slovenian, and English. Most importantly, Klara's motivation was deeply personal. 6 years prior, her husband and young daughter had been killed in a bombing at a train station in Madrid, an attack that was later definitively linked to funding from the Balkan route. Her grief had not broken her. It had instead transmuted into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. She was not seeking vengeance in a conventional sense. She desired a form of meticulous, systematic justice. She approached the mission not with patriotic fervor, but with the clinical detachment of a surgeon preparing to excise a tumor. Her psychological evaluation concluded that she possessed an extraordinary capacity for emotional compartmentalization, the ability to operate under immense, prolonged stress without compromising her cognitive function. She understood the risks with absolute clarity and accepted them without hesitation. Klara's preparation for the role of Anja Novak was an 18-month process of total deconstruction and reconstruction of her identity. Her training was not about clandestine tradecraft in the typical sense. It was an immersive education in becoming another human being. She spent 6 months in a secluded facility with a master art restorer, learning the physical craft until her hands could replicate the delicate brushstrokes of a 16th-century master. She learned the chemistry of pigments, the science of carbon dating, and the subtle signs of forgery. Concurrently, she worked with a linguistics coach, not just to perfect her German but to adopt the specific cadence and vocabulary of the Austrian upper class. They drilled her on everything from the proper way to discuss opera to the correct political opinions to hold on local Viennese issues. A cultural immersion team built a detailed dossier on the social landscape she was about to enter, mapping the networks of family, business, and old-school ties she would need to navigate. The most intensive component of her training, however, was psychological. She underwent rigorous conditioning designed to fortify her mental resilience. She participated in simulated interrogations and high-stress social scenarios, learning to control her physiological responses, heart rate, galvanic skin response to a degree that would render a polygraph test useless. She was trained in memory palace techniques to store operational details without writing anything down. The goal was to merge the personas so completely that Anja Novak was no longer a role Klara was playing, but a state of being she could inhabit indefinitely. The construction of Anja Novak's legend was a masterpiece of intelligence craft, a fictional life given substance with painstaking detail. The agency's Historical and Records Division built her a verifiable backstory that could withstand the most rigorous scrutiny. Anja Novak was born in Maribor, Slovenia. A digital birth certificate was created and backplanted into the Slovenian National Registry. School records were forged, showing her attendance at a primary school that had been destroyed in a fire in the late 1990s, making the physical records conveniently unverifiable. Her fabricated degree in art history from the University of Geneva was supported by a forged transcript and a thesis that was secretly written by an agency consultant and uploaded to the university's online archives. Her professional life was similarly substantiated. Her portfolio contained high-resolution images of restoration projects she had supposedly completed. In reality, these were works restored by agency contractors, with Anja's image digitally inserted into the before and after photographs. A Swiss art gallery, a long-term intelligence asset, provided a glowing reference, attesting to her brilliant work on a fictional collection of Renaissance drawings. The most crucial element was her digital footprint. A dedicated team spent a year creating Anja's online life, backdating social media profiles, populating them with years of sparse, intellectual posts about art and travel. They created email exchanges with real academics who were witting assets, discussing obscure points of art history. They planted citations of her work in online journals. By the time Klara was ready for deployment, Anja Novak was not just a cover story. She was a person who existed in the real and digital worlds as tangibly as anyone else. The technology developed for Operation Lachesis was designed to be invisible, eschewing traditional spy gadgets for tools that blended seamlessly into Anja's persona. Her primary communication device was her laptop, a standard high-end model. However, it contained a hidden, encrypted partition that housed a custom-built financial analysis suite. This software was disguised as a complex program for pigment analysis and spectral imaging used in art restoration. To an outside observer, even a forensic IT expert, the software would appear entirely legitimate. The communication protocol was based on advanced steganography. To send a report to her handler, Elias, she would take a high-resolution digital photograph of the painting she was currently restoring. Using her software, she would embed her encrypted message into the image's EXIF data and subtle chromatic noise, a pattern of single-pixel color shifts undetectable to the human eye, but readable by the agency's decryption software. She would then email this image to a contact at a university archive, a secure agency server, under the guise of seeking an academic opinion on the piece. Incoming messages were delivered in a similar fashion, embedded in scholarly articles sent to her as PDF files. For immediate emergency situations, she carried a specially modified fountain pen, outwardly a classic, expensive writing instrument. Its cap contained a micro camera with a pinhole lens, capable of capturing high-resolution images of documents with a simple, unobtrusive click of the plunger. The data was stored on a microdot memory chip hidden within the ink cartridge. These tools were designed around a single principle: to allow her to collect and transmit vast amounts of data without ever behaving in a way that deviated from the established patterns of an art historian. Klara's insertion into Vienna, now fully embodying Anja Novak, began in the spring of 2013. The first phase of the operation, lasting a full 7 months, was dedicated solely to the patient and meticulous establishment of her cover. She leased a modest but respectable apartment in the Josefstadt district, a neighborhood known for its academics and professionals. The apartment itself was part of her legend. It was slightly dated, filled with books on art history, and contained a small, north-facing studio with an easel and the chemical smells of turpentine and linseed oil. She joined professional organizations, attended lectures at the University of Vienna, and secured several small, legitimate restoration commissions from minor galleries and private collectors. These jobs served a dual purpose: They solidified her professional credentials and provided the raw material, the high-resolution images of paintings for her communications with the agency. She was deliberately quiet and unobtrusive, cultivating a reputation as a serious, somewhat solitary scholar. She did not attempt to enter Volkov's social circle directly. Instead, she mapped its periphery, identifying the key nodes, the galleries, the auction houses, the academic societies where he or his associates were present. Her handler, Elias, reminded her constantly that her primary weapon was patience. The goal was not to hunt Volkov, but to become a natural feature of the landscape he inhabited, a person whose presence was so normal and non-threatening that he would eventually approach her. The breakthrough came 9 months after her arrival. Clara had identified Volkov's deep interest in the symbolism of the Black Madonna in Central European art, a niche topic that intersected with his nationalistic ideology. Working with agency researchers, she wrote a dense, scholarly article on the subject, proposing a novel theory about the icon's connection to pre-Christian Slavic traditions. She submitted it to a respected but obscure academic journal based in Prague, one which the agency's research had confirmed Volkov subscribed to and read religiously. 3 months later, the trap was sprung. An acquaintance, a university professor she had cultivated, mentioned that he was attending a symposium where a prominent financier, Dragan Volkov, would be speaking on the topic of cultural asset investment. The professor, knowing her work, invited her to attend. At the reception following the lecture, the professor introduced her to Volkov. He recognized her name from the journal article immediately. He was intrigued, and his intellectual vanity was piqued. He engaged her in a lengthy, detailed discussion about her thesis, testing the depth of her knowledge. Clara, drawing on months of intensive study, met his intellectual challenge with ease. The conversation was purely academic, but for Clara, it was the most critical test of the mission so far. She left him with the impression of a brilliant, passionate scholar who was entirely uninterested in the world of finance. This was the seed of trust, planted in the fertile ground of his own ego. Over the next year, Clara carefully cultivated this seed. She and Volkov developed what appeared to be a platonic, intellectual friendship. They met for coffee every few months to discuss art and history. She never initiated contact, always waiting for his invitation. She never asked about his business or his clients. She maintained the fiction of a slightly struggling academic, occasionally mentioning the challenges of finding significant restoration work. This was a calculated move, designed to position her as someone of value but not of threat. The turning point occurred when Volkov, in the context of a discussion about art forgery, mentioned a client who was concerned about the provenance of a newly acquired 17th-century painting. He casually asked if she would be willing to conduct an independent assessment. This was the moment the entire operation had been building towards. She accepted with professional gravity, feigning slight hesitation about working with high-value commercial pieces. Her assessment of the painting was meticulously professional. She produced a detailed report, complete with chemical analysis of the pigments and infrared reflectography, ultimately confirming the piece was authentic. Her work was so thorough, so far beyond the standard assessments he was used to, that it impressed him deeply. She had demonstrated her value in a way that was directly relevant to his clandestine activities, all while maintaining her cover as a pure academic. She became his go-to authenticator, the quiet expert who could validate the assets he used to move his clients and the organization's money. Her new role granted Clara access to the periphery of Volkov's inner world. She was invited to his private office, a minimalist space in a secure building, to examine pieces. She occasionally met his clients, who were instructed to treat her as a technical consultant and to never discuss the financial aspects of their transactions in her presence. With each assignment, she deepened Volkov's trust. She was reliable, discreet, and, most importantly, completely incurious about his business. Her focus remained squarely on the art. During this period, she gathered a wealth of passive intelligence. Using the fountain pen camera, she captured images of documents left momentarily unattended on desks, shipping manifests, insurance certificates, corporate letterheads. Each image was a small piece of the puzzle, transmitted back to the agency inside a picture of a Madonna or a saint. The analysts at headquarters began to piece together the network's logistical and corporate structure, identifying front companies and shipping routes. But the core of the network, The central ledger that detailed the flow of funds remained elusive. Klara knew Volkov kept it on a dedicated, air-gapped laptop, a device he never let out of his sight. It was his Bible and his brain, and gaining access to it was the operation's ultimate and most dangerous objective. The final phase of the operation began in the late autumn of 2015. Nearly 2.5 years after Klara's arrival in Vienna, Volkov tasked her with a major project, authenticating and cataloging an entire collection of religious icons that a new, high-value client had acquired. The collection was to be temporarily stored in a secure vault adjacent to Volkov's personal office. The project would require her to work late into the evening for several weeks, granting her more prolonged and less supervised access to his inner sanctum than ever before. The agency recognized this as the opportunity they had been waiting for. The technical specialists developed a unique tool for the final act, a custom-designed USB flash drive. To any computer, it would appear as a standard storage device. However, it contained a sophisticated piece of malware. Once plugged in, it would execute a program that bypassed the operating system's security protocols and performed a full, sector-by-sector clone of the primary hard drive. The process was designed to be extraordinarily fast, capable of copying the entire contents of Volkov's laptop in under 2 minutes. The malware would then erase any trace of its own execution from the system logs. Klara's task was to create a plausible scenario to insert this device into Volkov's laptop for the requisite amount of time. The plan was simple and relied on established patterns of behavior. She would bring her final report on the collection on that USB drive and ask Volkov to transfer it to his machine, a mundane administrative task that would provide the perfect cover. The night of the operation was November 26th. Klara worked late in the vault, meticulously documenting the last of the icons. As planned, Volkov was in his office, working on his laptop. Around 10 p.m., she entered his office, carrying her own laptop and the custom USB drive. She explained that she had finished her report and had brought a digital copy for his records. Her heart rate was a steady 72 beats per minute, a testament to her years of psychological conditioning. Volkov, distracted by his own work, nodded and gestured for her to use the machine. She reported that her own laptop battery had died, a small, believable complication, and asked if she could plug the USB drive into his computer to transfer the file directly. He agreed without looking up. She inserted the drive. An LED on the drive blinked, indicating the data transfer. The cloning process had begun. The plan had allocated 120 seconds for the process. Klara engaged Volkov in a conversation about a minor detail in one of the icons, her voice calm and academic, her mind counting down the seconds. The conversation was a carefully scripted diversion, designed to hold his attention away from the screen. For 93 seconds, the world seemed to slow down. The quiet hum of the laptop's fan, the distant sound of a tram on the street below, the scent of old paper and ozone in the office, every sensory detail was amplified. The LED stopped blinking. The transfer was complete. She removed the drive, thanked him, and packed her things. She left the building as she always did, a quiet scholar finishing a long day's work. In her pocket was a small piece of plastic and metal containing the complete financial architecture of a terrorist empire. Her extraction protocol was initiated the moment she was clear of the building. She did not go back to her apartment. A prearranged taxi took her to a safe house in the suburbs. There, she handed the USB drive to a technical specialist who confirmed the data was intact. The next morning, she sent a single, pre-scripted text message to Volkov from a burner phone, explaining that a sudden family emergency required her to return to Slovenia immediately and that she would be in touch upon her return. It was a message designed to buy time and avert suspicion. She then destroyed the phone. From the safe house, a team drove her across the border into Slovakia, where she was met by a diplomatic vehicle and taken to a secure airfield. As she boarded the unmarked jet, the identity of Anja Novak, the person she had been for nearly 3 years, was systematically erased. Her apartment would be cleared out by an agency team that night. Her digital profiles would be taken offline, and within 48 hours, it would be as if she had never existed. Klara, the woman who had been dormant for so long, was on her way home, leaving behind a ghost and a ticking time bomb. The data on the USB drive was a revelation, exceeding the agency's most optimistic projections. It was Volkov's entire operational playbook. It contained the complete, unencrypted ledger of the Balkan route, detailing every transaction for the past 7 years. It listed the names of Hawala brokers, the locations of shell corporations, the account numbers for hundreds of bank accounts across dozens of countries, and, most critically, a list of corrupt officials, bankers, customs agents, and politicians who were on the organization's payroll. The intelligence was a financial Rosetta Stone, allowing analysts to finally see the network in its entirety. The dismantling of the Balkan route was executed with the same surgical precision as the operation that had exposed it. Over the next 9 months, a series of coordinated but seemingly unrelated law enforcement actions took place across Europe. It was a silent, rolling takedown. In Germany, a series of dawn raids targeted businesses suspected of tax evasion. In Italy, several bankers were quietly arrested for violating anti-money laundering regulations. In Greece, port officials were dismissed for corruption. Each action was based on the intelligence from Volkov's laptop, but was prosecuted under conventional criminal statutes, deliberately avoiding any mention of terrorism financing to protect the source of the information. The network was dismembered piece by piece, its assets frozen, its facilitators imprisoned, and its funding routes severed. Dragan Volkov was arrested 2 months after Klara's disappearance. The Austrian authorities, acting on a tip from a foreign partner, raided his office and found evidence of massive corporate fraud and tax evasion related to his legitimate business. He was never publicly linked to terrorism. He was sentenced to 15 years in a medium-security prison, a quiet end for the architect of a continental threat. In prison, intelligence intercepts revealed his bewildered state of mind. He never suspected the quiet art historian. His paranoia turned inward, and he spent his days trying to figure out which of his lifelong confidantes had betrayed him, a poison of suspicion that further fractured the remnants of his organization. The Balkan route, starved of his genius and its financial infrastructure, withered and collapsed. The flow of funds to the extremist group slowed to a trickle, severely degrading its ability to mount large-scale operations. Operation Lachesis was a stunning success, a case study in patient, human-centric intelligence that would be taught in secret for decades to come. The psychological cost to Klara was profound and lasting. The process of de-inhabiting the persona of Anja Novak was far more difficult than creating it had been. For 3 years, she had lived a life of total control and suppression, her every word and action a calculated performance. Returning to her old life, to her real name, felt like putting on ill-fitting clothes. The world seemed loud, chaotic, and unstructured compared to the rigid discipline of the mission. She had formed a complex, albeit false, relationship with Volkov, a man she intellectually despised but whose intellect she had come to respect. The dissonance left a permanent scar on her psyche. The agency provided extensive psychological support, but some things could not be repaired. She had held a thread of a man's life in her hands and, with clinical precision, had measured it out and allowed it to be cut. The cold, systematic justice she had sought had been achieved, but it brought her no peace, no sense of victory. She was given a new identity, a generous pension, and a quiet life in a coastal town. She never worked in intelligence again. She spent her days walking on the beach and reading history, a ghost of 2 different lives, forever defined by the silent, meticulous operation that had saved countless lives at the cost of her own. Is it ever justifiable for a state to destroy a person's identity to build a weapon, even if that weapon is used to prevent greater harm? At what point does the meticulous creation of a lie to dismantle a threat become an act that mirrors the moral compromises of the enemy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel.